Hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name's Jenny Valentish. Welcome to the first ever talk from the Australian Music Vault, this one being on gender imbalance in the music industry. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Kulin people as the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered. We pay respects to their elders, both past and present, and to other elders and Aboriginal people here today. I'll just really quickly introduce myself. I'm primarily a music journalist, have been since the early 90s, and I used to be a publicist and edited Triple J's JMag. I'm also a board member of The Push, which provides young Victorians with pathways into the music industry. And we're very committed to addressing gender imbalance in the industry, although we can always do better. Right, so to my right is Dr. Catherine Strong, a senior lecturer in the music industry program at RMIT University and chair of the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, the Australian New Zealand branch. Catherine also has just got a new book deal, editing a book on emerging research on gender equality in the music industry worldwide. So pretty excited to pick your brain on that. And then to Catherine's right, we have Jessie Lloyd, who is a cultural practitioner of Indigenous music and is dedicated to the continuation of song traditions. She has a broad experience in Indigenous music business and sector development. She was previously CEO of Songlines Aboriginal Music in Melbourne and Southwest Aboriginal Entertainment in Perth. She's produced various projects, performances, albums, and a music TV series for NITV. And she's undertaken multiple artistic and music director roles over the course of her career. Her current Mission Songs project explores the day-to-day life on the missions, settlements and reserves through music. And to the right, we have Grace Kindellan. Did I pronounce that right, Grace? Kindellan, I'm sorry.
Everyone says it Kindellan, so I'm thinking I really should just change it. But I have to talk to my dad about it first. Although, no, I don't. Fuck it.
You don't need to ask permission, Grace.
That's the spirit.
I'm Grace Kindellan and I'm not afraid of anything. Sorry, carry on.
Volunteers coordinator at Triple R, and prior to that, a volunteer at PBS. She's lead singer and guitarist of Melbourne band Wet Lips and co-creator of the annual Wet Fest, a day-long event committed to diversity and safety. This year it's on at Howler, and we'll give it a plug. It's on April 21st, so you can buy your tickets now. And then lastly, we have Tracee Hutchison, who's head of journalism at the Australian College of Arts. She has a storied career as a broadcast journalist, author, TV producer, starting off at Triple J, working nationally and internationally for ABC Radio, as a senior reporter for the 7:30 Report, co-host of Dig TV with James Rain, and series producer of Nomad at SBS TV. She's a former program director and board member at Triple R, and currently a board director of Music Victoria and chair of Music Victoria's Women's Advisory Panel. Actually, we have three of you here today from the Women's Advisory Panel. That's Catherine, Tracee, and Jessie. Right, so let's get started. In a wonderfully timely manner, The Music has just released its Power 50 list of the most influential figures in the music industry right now in Australia, about 20 of which were women and some of whom are here today. And I noticed that of these women, some were people who've been working tirelessly without fanfare for years and years, while, perhaps other people have taken some of the credit. So that's going to lead us on to Grace, talking about your role working at Triple R and what you've noticed about people who are applying for jobs.
Yeah, that's right. And which is something that's kind of linked to when I first interned at The Push, which of course Kate Duncan, one of the people mentioned on that list, works at that organisation. And I remember another woman who works there, Melinda Dine, talking about how there's always a huge representation of women and, gender non-conforming people in a volunteer level, but the further you go, up the echelons of power, the less women and gender diversity there is. I mean, I tend to think that kind of list of 50 people who are in power is just a bunch of other people who are in power kind of patting each other on the back, and that it's a kind of a symptom of the kind of industry fanfare and bullshit that exists kind of on top of or apart from the actual music community. But yeah, like through my work at Triple R and through volunteering at various community radio stations and projects. Sorry, Kate, not to distract from the actual honour. I think it's fantastic that you're on the list. I think you should be one of the people at the top echelons of power. So I feel like I got a little bit of attention early on in the show, and now I'm just going to keep talking. I'm feeling very giggly. But I think it's just you'll see that throughout the music industry. At volunteer levels and at entry levels, there will be plenty of women, but the further you go, the less there are. So, and one of the things that has been done over the past kind of couple of decades to try and increase representation of women and trans people further up in the organisation is to offer free training. But then, of course, in a lot of the cases, there aren't places for women to go once they've completed that training. So you kind of get this like plateauing level. So yeah, one of the things we're trying to do at Triple R is to kind of examine what are the pathways to power within the organisation, and to make sure that we're kind of we're still recruiting plenty of women, and on that note, kind of changing the frameworks that we might traditionally use to look at inclusion instead of just making it a blanket kind of we need more women in technical roles. One of the things that we've done is kind of tried to kind of break down those gender binaries a little bit, which was something we did in the kind of megahertz training this year, the kind of traditional like, oh, boys can't tackle girls, but girls can tackle boys thing. It just doesn't really work anymore when we have people who have a range of gender identities, from trans people to gender non-conforming people. So I guess we're trying to kind of break down some of the ways that we've traditionally dealt with trying to share power with women and trans people and people of colour, and make sure that we're conscious of the like less obvious ways in which people are kind of given training and power.
Triple J's Hack did their Girls to the Front survey recently, and they found that in 2016, 77% of indie record label managers in Australia were male. And that of the peak bodies in Australia, 65% of the board's members were male, again in 2016. Does anybody want to speak to that point?
Oh, look, I'll have a go at that. I think I just want to sort of follow up on that word power, because I think it's sort of, it's a really interesting word. I mean, we're all powerful. We all have our own personal power and perspective. I guess I like to sort of frame that word more around sort of leadership and responsibility and those sorts of things. And I would also just say, just to sort of follow on from what Grace said, I think it's also really important to, when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, to really remember to acknowledge people who have come before us in that framework, and particularly at a place like Triple R, which has championed women in leadership positions and been very supportive of women in leadership positions right from the foundation of the station. So I would just like to honour some people who've been pretty groundbreaking at Triple R in that regard, right from the beginning, and certainly in my tenure there as well under Kath Letch. It was a very supportive environment and encouraging environment for women in leadership roles and to take their place. Just to specifically go to that point before, I would really love to hear from Jessie on her thoughts around taking your place in this creative industry of ours. I think it's really interesting and sort of salient to consider that structurally, the industry, if we think about it in a formal sense, and we think about it as ARIA, I guess, being at the very pointy end of a very particular perspective and framework of how our industry works. And one of the key criterias to be on the ARIA board is that you run a record company, a major record company, which means that everyone on the ARIA board is a man. So the pervasiveness of that structure, which for all the wonderful work that is going on outside of that structure, and in fact the most interesting and powerful work is actually going on outside of the ARIA structure in lots of ways. But ARIA still controls a huge part of how our sector functions. And it determines then who's going to be the A&R representative. It determines who's going to get signed. And it has a kind of a built-in gender blindness if the people at the top don't even recognise how blind they are to what it is, and colourblind to what it is that we're even trying to tackle in terms of inclusion and diversity. So I guess to come back to that point, Jenny, about skewed figures around representation and women getting played on the radio, women on festival lineups. For me, as a board director at Music Victoria and someone who sat on the board at Triple R during a very important transition phase of that station's history when we were able to buy outright that building in Brunswick. I think unless we have women at the very top sitting at those tables, and I note that Jenny Morris is the chair of APRA, and having her there as the chair of APRA is a really important step forward. But until we really genuinely have 40-40-20 quotas inbuilt to at that level, I think all the other work is fantastic, but I actually think we have to start, that change actually has to come from the top.
Absolutely, because it's a trickle-down effect. And Jessie, you and I were talking earlier in the week about women in the workplace in the music industry, and you were basically saying you've set up your own structures and you found that necessary. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's intentionally or coincidentally. I just find myself working only with women, and that seems to work fine. No dramas, actually. A hell of a lot less egos. I mean, I learned quick when I was young and then studying music, the dynamics between male and females in a band, and what was the girl was supposed to do, what was the guy was supposed to do. And so, you know, that's why I started singing, because I was the only girl in the group, so I had to sing. And then, I just kind of didn't want to do that. Not didn't want to do that, I just didn't want to play that way. So I just find that I kind of do what I want with the people that I want, and it just, it just happens to be mostly with women, really. I work with guys as well, but generally, it just the chemistry is better, you know, there's sort of more understanding, and I think that's also because, you know, I think guys understand guys and girls understand girls, and that's when the job needs to get done, you don't have to try and decode what somebody means, you know. Sometimes it's like, I get what she means and let's do the job. And there's no other thing. That's how I think about it. So it's not really intentional, it's just I work with people that I know I don't have to explain myself or prove myself to.
Catherine, you've been doing some analysing of vintage, shall we say, magazines. Can you tell us what you've discovered looking at the decades past?
Yeah, so I have a job that means that I can spend hours a day sitting in the State Library reading old music magazines. So I've been going back through Beat and through Go Set and through like a whole bunch of different things. And it's absolutely amazing to sort of see how things have changed over time. But there was a really, really interesting phenomenon that I noticed that back in the days of Go Set, when Molly Meldrum was sort of really central to that publication, there was actually a lot of championing of women at that point in time. time. So there was a lot of, okay, I don't want to make it sound like there was like 50-50 representation or like women were being given equal access. It definitely wasn't the case. But there was an interesting thing going on where pop acts were being recognised. So there were a lot of women. Women were only allowed certain roles. As Jessie was saying before, there are these really strict gender roles about what women are supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do in the music industry. They can be pretty singers, but certainly in the 1960s it was very difficult for them to step outside of that role. But they were still being represented in the magazine in that particular role quite well. And then in the 1970s, you have this period where rock becomes the thing. And the magazines at that point in time shift towards the coverage of rock, and women literally disappear. They're gone. So you have this sort of period of about 5 years where you have to look really, really hard to see even one woman appearing in the pages of those magazines. You do get people like Wendy Saddington starting to appear eventually, but for a long time she's the only woman sort of stepping into this realm. And I think it's just one of those really good illustrations of just the way in which the value of music has been really strongly gendered. So Jenny sort of touched on this before. The idea that the things that we value most in music are not these things that are just what's good and what isn't. So I think a lot of the time in the arts, in music and in all the other arts, people like to talk about this idea of a meritocracy. They like to talk about the fact that, you know, if you're good, then that's all that matters. And if you're good enough, your stuff will just rise to the top, and it doesn't matter about anything else. It doesn't matter about gender or race or class or anything. If you're good, then that's all that matters. But over and over and again, we see that it's all of these other factors come into play. And if you are a particular type of person, your work will be evaluated in particular types of ways. So in the 1970s, what we see is the advent of rock. We see that this particular type of music is framed as being particularly serious and particularly important. And the stuff that women do, which is the more pop stuff, which is the place they're allowed, is reframed as being not very valuable and just frivolous and just throw away, and why would you bother talking about it? So, and that stuff has just really taken hold, and it hasn't gone away ever since, I don't think.
We'll get back to meritocracy when we move on to lineups, but just still on the point of women's voices being erased. Jessie, there's a new book that's come out in the past few weeks that I think's caused a lot of hurt, which is Clinton Walker's Deadly Woman Blues, a follow-up of his book Buried Country. Would you like to talk about that?
I haven't read his other book, Buried Country, which is about Aboriginal music, country music in New South Wales, which he's been touring a show. But recently, he's just launched, I think maybe like Wednesday last week in Sydney, he launched a new book called Deadly Women Blues. And it's got about 100 black women, which is, I think, you know, mostly Indigenous, and maybe about 4 or 5 non-Indigenous, including Marcia Hines, Vika and Linda, just to, you know, add some flavour, I suppose. Maybe to hit the 100, I don't know. But anyway, I'm one of those lucky women that are in the book, and many of my mates and peers. And unfortunately, we never got contacted or didn't know that he was doing this. So I'm assuming, because he hasn't contacted me, I'm assuming that he spent a lot of time on Google, just Googling us and reading our bios and interviews and stuff. This is a big book. It's really extensive, and if it was done properly, it'd be an awesome resource. But unfortunately, because it hasn't, it's probably as good as a gossip mag, because there's a lot of facts wrong about where people come from, and at first I was like, we couldn't believe it, and I happened to be with a whole lot of other muso mates, and we were all just sort of what, we're in here, and my main concern about a thing like that is that he's a middle-aged white man, and that he becomes the expert in my field. He already thinks he is because he's written it, and he actually thinks he's doing us a favour. He's titled it, you know, he's bringing the deadly back in deadly women's music. I mean, that's a blackfella word, you know, and he's like trying to use our word. That might be cultural appropriation, I don't know. he's also sort of saying, you know, he's unearthing all of these unknown and women and they're being reborn in this book. And it's like, what, did we die before? But I think it's, you know, it's 21st century oppression where somebody just thinks it's their right that they can actually do that. So, you know, I hope something happens where this book is not going to be used as a resource and this is not the way to do it. I hope it's used as an example of what not to do and what kind of journalism or whatever is not to be done. But it's just unfair, and all of the sort of women in this book that are living and the ones who have passed, that, you know, that this is they're presented in this way, that we're presented in this way. And yeah, there's a lot of upset women about this because, I don't know, I think maybe if it happened to white women, would somebody be that brave to do it? I don't know. But I think because it's Aboriginal women, that, we're doing them a favour, those poor ones, you know. It's like, I got a microphone, I can talk myself. Yeah, so, you know, that's a fresh open wound. That's only about a few days old, this book.
Apart from anything else, a lot of your career has actually been devoted to documenting and keeping songs and eras alive. So making you the ideal person to talk to, one would assume.
You'd assume. Yeah. Yeah, I just think it's just blatant. I don't know if it's naivety or ignorance. Just assume that we need saving. It's totally Jesus Saviour complex. I mean, did we die? Do we need to be reborn? No, I think, you know. Anyway, it's pretty full on, so yeah.
Thanks for talking to us about it. We're going to move on to lineups, both festival lineups and then your local venue lineups. Grace, you've written songs about this, haven't you? You've written songs about the dichotomy of having to sort of get to know people in a scene and liking people, but at the same time, those same people perhaps trying to keep you out of it.
Yeah, totally. I guess coming into like the Melbourne music scene as like a 19-year-old woman and starting a band and kind of going to see bands all the time. So my band Wet Lips started in 2012, and myself and Jenny and our drummer Mahini, who identifies as gender non-binary, were kind of, you know, like really young, going to see gigs all the time, starting our band and entering this scene that was super exclusive, super macho. And we were kind of trying to like gain some kind of traction as a band and recognition, and also to be part of this social thing. And we were just kind of constantly met with exclusion and this kind of sense that we're being treated as a minority and like as a real novelty act, like this funny kind of feminist punk band that like these, you know, 3 young people who thought they could be a legit band. And we just kind of experienced a constant like joke making, and then whenever these kind of like punk dudes would put us on a lineup, it would always be in this quite aggressive, almost ironic way. Like once we were put on a bill, and then next to our names in brackets, it was just like girls, and it was like, yeah, cool, good one, and yeah, again like. Not really feeling welcome at all. And like Jenny mentioned, this dichotomy of like sometimes kind of being like attracted to like men who are in positions of power, who are actively trying to exclude you, and just trying to negotiate all those things as a young woman, which is why like now I see young bands made up of people who have, you know, just finished high school and that kind of thing, who already, like something that really inspires me and makes me feel positive is that these young artists already know that they don't have to give a fuck about what these 40-year-old men who've been going to the tote a couple of times a week for 25 years, they already know they don't have to give a fuck about what they think. And they're kind of growing up in this space where like, I mean, maybe it's just because I've discovered it more, but like queerness and gender identity, like having different gender identities is much more common. And so I think just that sense of like being able to, explore your sexuality and not just assuming that everyone's heterosexual is kind of part of that, and that like queerness is so important to the feminist movement in just knowing that you can create different kinds of relationships that have a more equal balance of power.
And if we extend this to festivals, there's a story in Noisy this week by Lauren O'Neill, and she's saying, while 2018 has shown some improvement, such as Primavera Sounds and Field Day, at this point, flagging up gender disparity in music festivals feels like a yearly ritual, a shit boring one like doing your taxes. That she says there's a new initiative that hopes to put a stop to that. And that is the PRS Foundation has announced a campaign called Key Change to encourage international music festivals the world over to pledge gender parity on lineups by 2022, which sounds like a way off, but already 45 music festivals across the world have committed to take part this year. So do you think we need something similar here, or do we need to pressure Australian festivals to take part in Key Change?
Oh yeah, 100%. It just feels like, when, and like absolutely good on Camp Cope for calling out Falls Festival and for really taking that stand. And I think it's fantastic that for kind of one of the first times in history that them taking that stand has actually been met with a lot of people recognising that and rewarding them for that. And they're kind of, as a band, they're at this point where they're big enough that people like Triple J and major festival promoters can't just say, okay, well, we're just not going to book you again. Like, we're just going to essentially end your career. And yeah, on that note, I think it's like super important to recognise all the bands with women in them over the years who have done similar things and have not been met with that same recognition. And we are so lucky now to have had those kind of women artists making that space and creating this environment where finally it feels like these comments are getting some traction. I did feel a bit like a lot of music journalists were just like, oh, hey, did you hear like Camp Cope? Like they invented feminism. Like apparently it's not okay to just have like 96% men on festival lineups. And I just feel like you said, it's like this boring, the thing you quoted, it's this boring ritual every year. People are like, oh, it's really shit, like there's too many cis men on festival lineups, and people are like, oh, we really believe in having more women on lineups, we're so committed to gender diversity, it's such a fantastic thing, we love strong women. And then next year, of course, there are no women. And I just think it's just an absolute symptom of negligence of these old white men who are in positions of power, who believe it's a meritocracy, who have never really taken 1 second to consider what it might be like to have gone through this world with a different gender identity, or being a person of colour, or being someone who's not able-bodied. And it's just, absolute negligence and just clinging on to the kind of, these structures that have awarded them power with no kind of merit attached. So I think that having quotas or having some kind of concrete measurement, so that even if there's no quota, you can come back after a certain amount of time and just demand accountability to these people. And also just understanding that having representation of women and trans people on lineups is not just a matter of kind of cultural responsibility. It's also just a matter of safety, and that the more kind of there is a clear connection between people being sexually assaulted and just general violence in festivals where there isn't kind of representation of women and different groups of people on lineups. If you have a main stage at a festival where there are no women playing on that stage after 5 p.m, what you are saying is that the women and people who make music, what you are saying is that women aren't as valuable as people and artists as men. and you are creating this kind of, reinforcing kind of patriarchal structures of the society we live in. We're saying like certain groups of people have less value, therefore you don't have to treat them in the same way, you don't have to treat them with the same respect. So I think it's just finally time for us, for the people who we've been demanding accountability and representation from for decades, to actually take that seriously and not just keep on giving us these bullshit kind of wishy-washy, we love strong women, like bullshit things. Bye. Okay.
Catherine, actually talking about Camp Cope, they had created their T-shirts that everyone was wearing backstage at Falls. The person wearing this shirt stands against sexual assault and demands a change. But do you think calling out sexual assault and harassment actually brands people as difficult?
Yes, I'm sure it does. Yeah, and like Grace was just saying, a lot of people have suffered very, very serious consequences as a result of that. My sense is that with the so in Australia, after the Me Too sort of movement, there was a Me No More, a letter that was signed by a few hundred, and I think it was still open for people to sign last time I looked, people, mainly women and gender non-conforming people, talking about the experiences that they had in the Australian music industry. And you still sort of feel like it's the absolute tip of the iceberg, that the music industry has absolutely encouraged a culture where women's bodies are seen as prizes. So the whole sort of sex, drugs and rock and roll culture is one where you hear it like really, really often when men are writing their biographies. One of the things they'll talk about is, I went to the band and I saw that the way that the women were looking at the guys, and I saw that they had the hot girls, and so I thought, I want to do that. So many men talk about the fact that access to women and women's bodies, thank you, yes, to snatch, right, is one of the reasons why they sort of get into the game in the first place. And so that sort of idea, the idea that women are to be won and to be had, I think has really permeated the industry. You can see it in the way that people have spoken when they write about their experiences, in the way that women have so often been talked about as being dismissed as being groupies if they turn up to gigs. So a lot of women musicians, when people have done research, like what's your experience as being a woman or a non-gender conforming person in the music industry, often people will come back and the story they will tell over and over again is, I turned up to the gig and either, one, they assumed I was the girlfriend of the guy playing the guitar, or two, they assumed I was a groupie. So the people who were in control of the spaces in like the gig spaces, the record stores, the studios, those people will often come into those places with an assumption that men will come into the spaces with the assumption if you see a woman, those are the two categories that they fit into. So every woman who has worked to make progress in this industry has had to fight back against those assumptions over and over and over again. And so like a couple of people have noted, people have like the debt that I think the young women coming into the industry now owe to the people who pushed back against that stuff. Not that I'm not saying it still doesn't need to be done, but those first women who went into those spaces and really started to say, no, you can't talk to me like that. I'm not going to be treated like this. The courage that must have taken and that it still takes, because a lot of this stuff is still going on, would have been absolutely phenomenal. What was the question? I forget now.
You've nailed it. I can't remember either.
Just leave it there then.
Actually, I want to add to that. I had an experience when I was young. I was playing bass for this band. They asked me to play. There was a tour. And we'd done a few shows and then we were about to go on tour, and I got sacked from the band because the guys' girlfriends didn't want a girl on the band on tour.
Because of the way that...
Because I was a groupie, of course.
Jessie,
too the way hot. It would have been portrayed. Too hot, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think that signals that another kind of issue is that this culture of competition, this idea, which is common to a lot of fields, that there's one seat at the table for women, and that you all have to fight for it, which is really unhealthy and creates this atmosphere of competition, and you're kind of conditioned to cut other women musicians down instead of supporting each other. So I think it's really wonderful now that we're starting to kind of get rid of that, particularly in Melbourne. I think we're so lucky to have such a rich community and starting to understand that we need to kind of, owe like a debt to the women who've come before us. And we also have a real responsibility to support, the women who are going to join the scene after us and making space for each other.
So Tracee, I want to throw to you on this one to start with. Anyway, I want to talk about awards. So Grammy's boss Neil Portner was interviewed backstage at this year's ceremony, and only 17 out of 86 awards went to women or acts fronted by women. And he was asked about the obstacles facing women in the industry. And he said, "I think it has to begin with women who have the creativity in their hearts and souls, who want to be musicians, who want to be engineers, who want to be producers, who want to be part of the industry on an executive level to step up." That kind of inspired some indignant responses from Pink and Sheryl Crow. And Sheryl Crow said, "I wish the Grammys would return to male and female categories." What are your thoughts on that? Is that a pro or a con in your mind?
There's so many things. I just really... before I came in here tonight, I took a moment to... Sorry, Jenny, I'm not going to quite answer yet. Before I came in here tonight, I took a moment to go into the music vault and whenever I can, and spend a little bit of time with my friend Chrissy Amphlett, who's incredible. One of her incredible outfits is there. Just for a little bit of Chrissy love and talking about incredible women who broke the mould and sort of didn't fit the part and sort of, ended up wearing labels like, I don't even want to dignify them, but, I think we know how, Chrissy was probably viewed by the male part of the industry. She was everyone's fantasy. And she put on an armour and a uniform. That uniform was a lot of things, but it was an armour as well. She knew what that uniform was all about, and she played everybody. And she was incredibly brave and incredibly courageous and not particularly rewarded for it. And I'm really... Do you know the thing that I find... the conversation around the Grammys is a really interesting one, because how we recognise people's contribution and reward people's contribution, people who are not men, their contribution, is a very vexed one. And I think the time is absolutely right for us to reassess how we recognise the contributions of people who are not men in our industry, in whatever form that contribution takes. And I think that we are at the right time for something that is perhaps going to exist in a parallel universe that might actually do that. And the delicious and palpably wonderful thing about listening to Grace, listening to Jessie, listening to Catherine, getting a sense of the energy in this room that is a national, global energy shift, a massive paradigm shift. Those people on the ARIA board do not have a clue about what is coming, but it is coming. You cannot have people as articulate and passionate as Grace and bands like Wet Lips and the kind of community that we've got in Melbourne, particularly in Melbourne, but not isolated to Melbourne. You cannot have the kind of juggernaut that is happening around a desire for change and demanding our place without it just simply rolling over them. You know, it is coming. It is absolutely, you can almost touch it. And that is what is so, I'm the elder on this panel, and, you know, I've been through many cycles of the first wave of punk in the late 70s and the incredible revelation that women could play instruments. You know, my God. And that they would get played on the radio, and that there would be women on the radio to play that stuff. And I worked with the woman who remains the only woman who's ever anchored a solo breakfast program on FM radio in Australian radio history in Gail Austin. She was doing that in the late 70s. We go through cycles of this stuff. The difference is that there is such a significant shift around a demand for a different way. And the different way is female, and it just is. I know that I'm being very binary about that, but the different way is not the male way. And I just feel that there's a huge, huge juggernaut that is coming. And, you know, get on board or get out the way.
We've actually got a mic that's going to go around the audience. So if anybody wants to talk, either ask a question or talk about how this juggernaut can speed up even further and flatten everything in its path, then please do just put your hand up.
Come on.
Come on.
Or we can talk about awards. That's okay. All right, we'll keep going for now, and then we'll come back to that. But yeah, talking about waves, actually, in the 90s, for instance, we had Ladyfest, we had Riot Girl, we had a whole bunch of bands, female artists who were writing about things like sexual assault, sexual abuse, and then it kind of seemed to disappear, recede back into the earth. And we are having this resurgence now. But Grace, I think you've got some thoughts about how we can keep momentum going.
Yes, let me share those thoughts. So yeah, I guess like I said, when we formed Wet Lips, and I started volunteering in community radio, I met women like Sarah Blaby and Janelle Johnston who work in community radio, and they talked to me about Rock and Roll High School, which was a place, in Collingwood in the 90s where, young women could get like cheap music lessons, and a lot of bands formed out of that. And I just thought, like, where the fuck were they when I was 19? And, they'd kind of been majorly excluded from music communities for a whole range of different reasons. And obviously there are still some of those women who are performing today and who've made, are still making incredible contributions to the music scene. It's not like they ever fully went away. It's just that they have never received the same recognition from their male peers and from the authorities in music. So one of the things, having kind of seen that, having kind of heard of that wave kind of breaking and disappearing, I'm really interested in how we maintain this current wave, because there is one. And, I'm every bit as optimistic that it will continue to just grow and grow and grow. And I'm interested in helping maintain that. And one of the things that I think has to happen is, understanding that history comes in waves, recognising the people that have come before us, and trying to continuously make way for new people to be part of the community and to take over positions of power, so that we're continually kind of passing knowledge to new people. And also just for the fact that it's really difficult to be a woman playing music. It's even, I imagine, even more difficult for people who are non-binary and trans, or people of colour. And so it's so natural for us to burn out. and to want to give it all up, because it sometimes feels like we are dealing with the same shit with Wet Lips that we've been dealing with since we started 6 years ago. Just sometimes feel like no one's fucking listening. And so I think one of the really important things is for us to kind of pass on projects and not kind of hold on to things until the bitter end. Yeah, which is one of the reasons why Wet Lips is taking a break, to kind of think about what we really want to do musically, and to not kind of just get caught up in keeping on doing it because it's a thing that's happening, and really like deeply think about our kind of where we want to put our creative energy and how we're going to continue to be a part of the community.
Do we have any more questions, or a question from the audience?
I can come up with one.
Yes, please. You sure?
Obviously, no one's got any. I've just joined my first band, and I'm 52 years old, and I can't play an instrument, so pretty excited. And I love microphones, but I was just going to ask a question about a word that I find very difficult to say, even though I've been saying it for years, which is genre. I've been having a few conversations with a few people about. I just wonder if anyone's got any comments about genre, musical style, musical genre, and whether or not you think there's greater or lesser, for want of a better word, equity across different styles. So I've had a conversation with someone who's got a thing called Synth Babes going in Sweden, which is a global collective of women working in electronic music. And I mean, that's an example of someone who's doing something about a sense that there's a lack of equity in that industry. In that genre. So I just thought that was a potential question. If you have nothing to say, that's okay.
Can I do this one? Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a really big deal. So when you look at different genres, there's a real differential between them in terms of where you see women, gender non-conforming people being encouraged and where they're completely excluded. So there was a news article that just went around a couple of days ago about the electronic dance community in Australia, which probably some people have here heard about, which was they had a Facebook page called Tracks and Snatch, which was them sharing pictures of women, including like non-consensually sharing pictures of their girlfriends, things like that. So that sort of gives you some sort of insight into the culture that can exist within certain segments of electronic dance music. We still know that there is this phenomenal underrepresentation of women when it comes to the sort of technical side of music making. So in studios, in terms of production, in terms of electronic music, we're still looking at figures of like 5%. In most cases. So there is still this real gap in terms of technology because girls are still told when they're young that tech is for boys. Like we still have this divide. And a lot of this stuff comes from other things that are going on in society. It's not just about music. It's about what little girls are told they should and shouldn't be playing with when they are first, in kindergarten. So the boys can do this and the girls can do this. And girls still don't engage with technology in the same way that boys do. And there's a whole bunch of things going on there. But also things like I was saying before, rock is still coded as masculine. Heavy metal, like if you want to go and find me a whole bunch of women and gender non-conforming, going outside of the binary in metal is something that still doesn't really happen all that much. So some genres are really open to thinking about sexuality and gender in more fluid ways, whereas others are still really, really down the line in terms of that sort of stuff, and metal is one of those places. But whereas in hardcore, even though sometimes you get really masculine areas of hardcore, like hardcore punk, not hardcore dance music, some of those places are really, really full-on masculine, but there's also a whole bunch of feminist bands in those spaces as well, so you also get a bit of that going on. But yeah, genre is a really big deal. Sounds are gendered. We hear particular types of sound, and we will associate certain types of sound with masculinity, certain types of sound with femininity. Think about the difference between a flute and an electric guitar in a lot of ways, and that sort of leads people into certain areas and leads to them producing certain types of music and being judged differently depending on the type of music that they make. Yeah, so big deal, definitely.
And the lack of tech has led Listen to create lists of, I think, sound engineers and electronic artists that can be booked. So yeah, great point. You've got a question.
Just on genre again and about metal and stuff, there's that stereotype often that hip-hop, and it's a little bit racist, I think, that hip-hop is the most sexist genre, but growing up in the outer suburbs and going to punk and metal shows, there was that whole idea that the girls are groupie, and I'm thinking about underage shows and starting a bit earlier with those small gigs that are for everyone under 18. I hardly ever saw a girl on stage, and wondering whether anyone had any ideas about that. Because especially as an underage girl, I remember going to Soundwave and the singer from Killswitch Engage said on stage, is there any 16-year-old pussy in the audience tonight? And often the culture at my high school was bands like Parkway Drive and metal bands that would tour these small venues, $5 entry kind of thing, were hitting on 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And I just wondering if anyone had any ideas to make those spaces safer.
That's gross, just to start off with. That's just so foul. Some colleagues of mine are writing a paper where they're just absolutely caning Parkway Drive for some of that behaviour, so that might be encouraging to hear. I don't know if anyone else would like to.
I think it comes to the conversation I think you and I had over the phone where, and if some of you are creatives or artists, you might find this as well. I found a lot of these topics didn't really relate to my musical career, record labels or Triple J, which is exciting because it means you can have a successful musical career without actually being in the scene. The music scene is quite broad, and what's sort of shown downstairs, if you've had a look, I think is sort of one segment of the music industry, and I don't have anything to do with that. So it's comforting to know that even if you're not sort of getting on falls festivals and all that, maybe that's not your target market. But if it is, it's needs to be addressed. But I find that. I wanted to add something that you said before. With the issues of not being able to go on tour with the guys because I was a female, what made it easier for me in the beginning of my career when I was playing with a lot of guys, is that when I no longer started dating men and I was dating women and I was no longer threatening, then I was a bit more okay. So there was no challenge there or there was no threat. So yeah, she's right. She can hang with us. So that I noticed that, and I was like, okay, that's I can take advantage of that. Yeah. Or in any situation where I find, being Indigenous, there's heaps of hurdles I come across as well, where I generally, trying to find a way around it. And even with this Mission Songs project that I'm working on, I'm curious about it because I find there's an opportunity in that, in making things better, in creating change. And out of it, I think I'm creating a new genre of Australian music, which is pretty exciting. And it's just about, I think, me kind of coming to a hurdle or a thing and go, oh, right turn, what can I go around it? So, or making an opportunity out of a shit situation.
You've created whole new structures.
Yeah, because, I don't like the ones that I come across, so go this way.
We're out of... Oh, yeah, go on. Oh, there's another one here. All right, we'll extend.
Hi. Sorry, I just got one more question. Thank you so much for your time. I just wanted to kind of make an observation that it looks like most people that are in the room tonight are women and gender diverse people. And I feel like what you're talking about, I feel like this great sense of urgency all the time to just fix this shit. And I know you all do too. And I'm just wondering like how we can get more of those men that you were talking about that still run radio stations, that still run those music record labels to be sitting in these seats next to me. Because it makes me so frustrated, and I'm just, you know, without us like dragging them here, like how can we make them care more and transfer that urgency and some of that emotional labour onto the men that already have the power?
Well, I don't know.
Me neither.
Because I hate it. Like, you've hit on this really complex and difficult kind of dichotomy, which is that we need for men in power to listen to us and do things about better representation of women in all sorts of areas, and that's going to be essential to keeping this change going, is to educating those men and for women to, you know, work together with them. But it can be really fucking difficult. And the desire to just become a separatist movement is really strong. And of course there are supportive men, and there is a huge role for men to play in this movement and this wave. But the actual doing of it and getting those men in power to listen, I don't know.
I think I would like to give a shout out to some separatist festivals while we're here then. Obviously we have Wet Fest, we also have Electric Lady, Sad Girls Club, the YWCA's Rack Off, we have Trans Genre, and we have Sass the Patriarchy. Am I missing any? Anyone want to plug anything? Girl Fest? Yep. Great, okay. And I think it would be great if people follow on Facebook Mega Music Equity Group for Action. You'll pretty much everything we've talked about here, you'll at some point see there as well. These are all hot topics of conversation. Did we have one more? Yeah. Do you want a mic? There's one behind you.
So I've got a Me Too story. I was at a music festival. I got groped. Immediately I reported it. They got the guy and he apologised to me in front of the head of security. And then I thought, oh, okay, cool. Well, they'll probably do something about it. Not so. It ended up taking 25 hours for them to finally kick him out, and that was me kicking and streaming. It was a full-time job for me at that festival over that period of time. I cited him numerous times in between that first reporting when he apologised and when they finally kicked him out, and the pushback was just ridiculous. It was just disgusting. I've spoken to the head of the SOCIT, which is Sexual Offence Unit in the police, that we're in charge just in the last couple of weeks, because I finally got to the point where I was able to say, so tell me about all these failings. And I said, well, number one issue is ejection. And what's the story there? Because you're telling me, oh, you know, we can't really eject, it's a private place. And then they're telling us, oh yeah, they can totally eject. And this is all happening in the festival. But clearly those sort of places, they don't want numbers, they don't want statistics, they don't want those things to be coming out. It's always just coming out through the police. Police have these reports. You never hear festivals going, oh, by the way, this is what happened. So what I really think, because I said to the policeman, I'm like, we need more accountability. Like, if you're not going to take responsible and you can't, then, and the festival won't or can't or whatever, like, where is it going to come from? Is it going to come from the a law? Like, if a fire was to happen, it's like a risk. Just like you can't have glass when you go in there, they pop your boot. They're like, if you got glass, you're not allowed to bring glass. If you have a fire, you know, it's a risk. And I'm like, what about like if it was a fire? And he's like, oh well, that would be different because there would be the Fire Act, and so then we would take action. And I'm like, well, And he was like, but this is different. Every case is different. I'm like, no, it's not. I've been groped so many times. The number of times is ridiculous. And it's not different. And so what do we need? Do we need a law? And he was like, oh, no, that would be too hard. That wouldn't work. And then I was like, oh, well, do we need a council like to say, okay, you can only have this permit if you agree to do all these things and have accountability? And he's like, oh, no, that won't work. And I was like, okay, tell me what will work. He's like, I don't know. So in my mind, sorry for a really long question, but my mind is we need actual laws to be able to say these people perpetrators need to be kicked out, because it needs to happen in the time. You don't want to. I had to go through the court process. It was 2 years. That's too late. He's already been to the festival, gone and had his good time, and he's off doing whatever else. You need accountability at the time. So we need laws, strong laws, to say that that has to happen. And which laws and who do we go to? Like, who am I going to go to? Sorry for the really long question.
Thank you for telling that story. Sorry, what's your name? Hey, Marianne. Well, it's sexual assault, so you press charges, yeah? Yeah, I understand, yeah. And I also, the fact that you were courageous and determined enough to push it through the court, I really actually do, and maybe I'm, at 55 years old, just still the naive idealist. But I really do believe that time's up. I just really believe it. The response to how the camp coped, just in terms of where they played on that lineup at Falls, the way in which people are actually responding to that kind of behaviour. I know certainly at Music Victoria we do a lot of work. It may not look like it, but we actually do a lot of work around safe spaces, best practice guidelines. There is a very robust discussion going on at the moment about how we determine the criteria for a festival that might be considered as the festival of the year, for example, in our Age Music Victoria Awards, for example. And believe me, that issue is front and centre of those conversations. So bravo to you and your courage and everyone else who has been in that situation. Not all of us go down that path because we know how challenging and difficult that can be, and the onus on you to actually stay with that. And it goes to the heart of your question earlier, which we didn't really answer properly, and my apologies for that. But I do really feel that time is actually up on that behaviour. People are calling it out, and it is now the responsibility of the venue owners, of the festivals, to actually do something, because, and I know I'm blurring two different issues here, but with the Camp Cope thing, the response to that was that, so Jen Clower and the entire Lookout Kid kind of cool kids, they won't play Falls as a result of that Camp Cope thing. So you can't, there's a kind of an economic model that actually starts coming in that is actually being activated now. That the sort of artists that people want on their lineups won't play unless there is a guarantee around a safe space. So it's because of you and others who are determined to ensure that person didn't get away with that, and you refused to let that person get away with it. But I really, and I don't feel like I'm just plucking out something out of nothing. I genuinely think that the onus is now on bookers, on promoters, on venue owners to ensure that their venues are safe spaces, because the tolerance level is at the floor. And I genuinely believe that we're in that time now.
Can I just jump in quickly? There is a task force that's been working with the state government over the last few years on exactly this issue, and a bunch of venues in Melbourne have signed up to like a new code of conduct, where one of the things that it says is if that behaviour is reported, the person goes. So it's not enough yet. Like, I agree with you that like heaps more needs to be done, but these small steps are being taken, which is it's a start, I suppose. Yeah.
And hopefully Key Change by PRS, that global venture, will put more pressure on as well. And thanks for sharing that story. We do definitely have to wrap it up now. Please join me in thanking the panellists for this really interesting conversation.